Department. Would you like to call roll, please?
Mr. Bullock?
Here.
Mr. Moldaver?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Miss French? Miss Lomas? And Miss Weber is not here. We have Mr. Casebeer?
Here.
Thank you. So item number 3 is to approve the minutes from January 19th.
Mr. Chair, move approval of the draft minutes of the last meeting.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, so the minutes from last meeting are approved. Mr. Benson, are there any adjustments to this agenda today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any adjustments, but I do have an announcement to make. Last week, we were informed by the Department of Fish and Game that the Creeks Division was awarded a $1 million grant from the Fisheries Restoration Grant Program for the construction of Phase 1 of the Mission Creek Fish Passage Project at the Caltrans channels. So we are working on a very tight schedule to complete all of our permitting, environmental review, and be able to go to construction on that project this summer. We're hoping to start in about the first or second week of July.
All right, thank you. That's great news. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on any topics not covered on the agenda? No? Okay, moving on. Item number 6. Committee member and staff communications.
I just wanted to note that we did have a meeting of the committee's budget subcommittee on January 27th. Mr. Moldaver, Mr. Bullock, and Ms. Weber were all present for the meeting, and we discussed just generally the approach to the FY12, FY13 Creeks Division budgets. We're going back to a 2-year budget cycle this year, and mostly we spoke about the budget in general terms. There's no new big initiatives or big surprises coming up in the next 2 years. Revenues are up slightly. TOT revenues are up slightly, which is positive and will help things. And we will probably have one more budget subcommittee meeting in March, and then maybe another in early April if necessary. And we will be presenting, the budget will be presented to City Council on April 19th. We will be presenting the budget in detail to this committee on April 20th. That's it.
So moving on to number 7, the chair subcommittee appointments. If you guys have reviewed attachment number 2, it's in the package. The purpose of this is for the committee to review the existing subcommittees, identify the need for and interest in subcommittees for 2011, and to appoint and or continue members to those committees. Do we have any discussion about this?
Mr. Chair, I would just say that in the last calendar year, we had 3 subcommittees for the Creeks Advisory Committee. First is a standing committee, and that's our budget subcommittee. All of the committee memberships are limited to 3 members so that we don't run into any kind of Brown Act violations. We had the budget subcommittee as our only standing or permanent committee. We also had a outreach and education subcommittee and a watershed subcommittee. My recommendation is to dissolve the outreach and education subcommittee this year because that was set up for the express purpose of advising staff on the public outreach and education plan, which was revised and updated by the committee last year. And so the essential purpose of that committee has been achieved, and so we can dissolve that committee. The watershed subcommittee was established to primarily look at creek and ocean-related issues, water quality-related issues in the general plan update that the city is working on. That process is ongoing, and I think coming back to the City Council next month. So my recommendation is to keep the Watershed Subcommittee going into 2011, or through 2011.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, if it's not premature, I would move that the committee dissolve the Outreach and Education Committee with the understanding that if there's a future need, it can be convened on an ad hoc basis, but to retain the Watershed Committee.
I'll second.
Any comments on that? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, so then that passes, and we're going to maintain the Budget Committee. Anyone want to make a motion for that? Do we have to have a motion?
I don't know if you have to have a motion for that. It's a standing committee. So we already have it. But Mr. Chair, it is your prerogative to appoint the members of those subcommittees. And historically, for the Budget Subcommittee, we have had the chair of this committee. We have had the immediate past chair of the committee. And then, generally speaking, we've had the vice chair of the committee so that they're engaged in the budget process, and we have some of that institutional memory available as we go forward. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's kind of what's been established in the past. The Watershed Subcommittee only has one member that's still on this committee from last year, and that's Ms. Lomas. So there are two open spots available on that committee.
Well, are you content with staying on the Budget Committee, Lee?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I am. And by dint of good fortune, we not only have 2 slots on a great subcommittee, but we have 2 great new committee members. So I don't want that to affect your thinking in any way, Mr. Chair. But yeah, I'd be glad to stay on the Budget Subcommittee.
And I think Ms. Weber agreed to, and I will agree to for the budget. So that's the 3. And then is anyone interested in sitting on the Watershed Subcommittee? Anybody else?
I would.
No? Okay. So is 2 enough people? All right, very good. All right, moving on then to item number 8. The Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project Restoration Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tonight we have 2 presentations from our Public Works engineering staff who are working on creek-related projects. The first presentation is going to be an update on the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project Lagoon Restoration Plan. That just reminded me of something on the last item that I forgot, and that is we have, Mr. Chair, if we can go back to item number 7, we have 2 not subcommittees, but liaisons from this committee that serve on other task force or subcommittees for other departments. One is the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project Design Subcommittee, and Mr. Wilson served on that, and he's no longer on this committee. And then the other one is the Integrated Pest Management Advisory Committee in the Parks and Recreation Department. Daniel Wilson also was the liaison from this committee to that group. So if any committee members are interested in serving on those, the IPM committee does continue to meet regularly. The Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project Design Subcommittee has not met for several years, but I know that a meeting is imminent, I think coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So they're reconvening to update stakeholders and members of the community on that project. So if there's somebody on the committee, I think it would be a good use of time to be updated on that project and be able to come back and advise the committee about what the current design is.
Any volunteers?
I'd be happy to volunteer for the Lower Mission Creek.
Oh, great, thank you. And for the pest control? Anybody?
That's okay. Thank you, and I apologize for missing that before. So as I was saying, we have two public works projects that are that involve creeks, and the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project has been in a design process for some time. It was recently permitted by the Coastal Commission for a component of the project in the coastal zone right down near the mouth of Mission Creek, and this lagoon restoration plan is a component of that coastal development permit. And we have Jessica Grant, who is a project planner working on that project, here tonight to give you a presentation. Jessica.
All right. Hi again, Jessica Grant, Public Works Project Planner. Yes, I'm happy to discuss tonight the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project Lagoon Restoration Plan. As Cameron was mentioning, it is under the umbrella of the larger Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project, and for most of you know, that's a decades-old project, and many facets and components to it, and one of the facets is the Lagoon Restoration Plan. And again, for a little bit of the background for those that you might not know of the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project, it starts basically at the mouth of right at Cabrillo Bridge and then goes all the way upstream to about Cannon Perdido Street. And the whole purpose of that project is to improve flood protection, creek rehabilitation, species habitat enhancement for like steelhead trout and tidewater goby. So moving on to the specifics of the Lagoon Restoration Plan, there's one component actually right outside of the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Plan, and it's the replacement of Cabrillo Bridge, which is this section right here. And with that project, there is a lagoon restoration associated with that. So that's highlighted in the blue areas. And it's actually, there's a little section up here that's also proposed to be restored. So starting from that point on, as you see indicated in the red, is proposed area for the Lower Mission Creek Lagoon Restoration Plan. And one of the biggest issues before when we were trying to scope the project and knowing the dynamic nature of lagoon is trying to set, well, what's the best areas to put the restoration at. And one of the exercises that we went through was meeting up with the waterfront department, who had great aerial imagery over the past 8 to 9 years. And we really wanted to kind of get a better idea of when the lagoon was inundated. And all of the aerial images were taken in the fall, actually, when the tide's the lowest. So all of these little squiggly lines that you see here represent a year. And the years that we used was 2001 through 2009. And this exercise was actually really interesting because playing into the footprint of the lagoon was one of the factors was the Army Corps dredging. They dredge every about 3 years, and they changed the outflow of the sand, ranging as west as, it's right around Fest Parker. Doubletree Hotel is one of the outlet areas, so that's kind of the westerly border that they have permitted with the Coastal Commission, and then as far east a little bit right around the Cabrillo Bathhouse. And so that actually played a factor into the footprint of the lagoon. So for example, let's say pick this line, in 2002, the outfall was actually towards the west for the dredging permit, and then our dredging pipeline. And then say if you were to pick it's a little hard to tell with the colors in this room, but this is the 2009, and then that was the outlet was at the east of Cabrillo bathhouse. And so that, it just played a part, again, with pre-2003 was a more of advanced shoreline position of the lagoon, and then when the outlet was further east, it wasn't, it was a little bit more towards the north. And then another factor of some of the retreat was the impact of large waves. So we actually had significant waves in 2008, 2009. And so what happened was when the waves came and hit, you know, this area, then the wave energy transferred over to the northern portion here, which eroded this section of the lagoon here. And other issues contributing to lagoon area could be significant storms. We didn't experience too significant of storms for 2001, 2008, just like I think everybody remembers the 1995 year, but that's another factor as well. So anyway, we were pretty confident with this exercise to move forward with these areas here. And it's stipulated also too with Coastal Commission conditions too as kind of the parameters. And then helping us with the lagoon restoration plan, and in our audience today is David Black, the landscape architect, and Tamara Klug, part of Intrex, who is a restoration expert in town. And so this is what we ended up with. Right here, the line here and line here are the limits of the Cabrillo Bridge lagoon restoration project. And then moving here is the Lower Mission Creek restoration project. And the only major difference here between these zones that I'll discuss in a minute is there's a bio-revetment, that's rock revetment here associated with the Cabrillo Bridge replacement project. And then as we move further out, there's that's really when we move into the full lagoon habitat. And again, the 4 zones that we came up with was coastal dune, there's my mouse, coastal dune scrub on the upper slope, riparian scrub, the mid slope, transitional wetlands in this area, and emergent wetlands here. And again, we're gonna try, the whole goal is to have a nice blending from this restoration onto this. And then within the zones, there's a blending of habitat too. So the zone layer, with their elevations, they overlap just slightly. And as far as for grading for this project, we're not anticipating any grading, but we're looking into doing some little micro grading in the coastal dune area, like maybe 24 inches high, sporadically in this area. And I'm not going to go into details of the plant list in between these zones, but if you have any questions, we do have our experts available tonight. And then associated with this lagoon restoration plan, and it's also part of the conditions of the coastal development permit, is a habitat restoration enhancement monitoring and management plan program. And the Cabrillo Bridge was also required to have one as well. And because we're anticipating to do construction for both at the same time, it would really be best to be using one document. So that's what we did. We've merged the document into one, and that's for the Coastal Commission under review right now. But again, it's just the whole purpose is to supplement the restoration plan, provide just a little bit more detailed guidance on what to do for maintenance. And as far as the maintenance period for this project and the other project is a 5-year maintenance period. And because of the dynamic nature of the lagoon, I really want to make the whole plan adaptive. So if something's not working, what's plan B, and then what's plan C, etc. As far as for funding for this project, it's all, again, under the umbrella of Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project, so anything with the creek widening, it's all Prop 50 funds, and then also South Coast Assessment funds. And then specifically for the lagoon restoration, in December, the county flood control and city entered into a cost-sharing agreement. So that's how this project will be funded through that venue. So as far as the schedule, it's very exciting. The county is going to begin Reach 1A this summer, which is just north of the State Street Bridge, then going up to about Harbor View Inn. And then we're hoping to follow that shortly with the Cabrillo Bridge replacement project. And that project, there's, as far as bridge goes, construction goes, there's three major components when you have to go through Caltrans. It's preliminary engineering phase, right-of-way phase, and then construction phase. So we're still in the right-of-way phase for that project, and that's really dictating what the future timeline will be. So we're right now guesstimating fall of 2011 or spring 2012. And we hope to begin the lagoon restoration project for both Cabrillo Bridge and the Lower Mission Creek lagoon restoration in the second year construction of Cabrillo Bridge, which is estimated then to start summer of 2013. And besides that restoration, I know, and I believe that Creeks has alerted you that there's a much larger restoration project as well. So if I follow the mouse and basically this area and then some of the lower portions that's under concept or hasn't even started concept development, kind of conceptual development stages, but Creeks can talk a little bit more about that. So that includes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any committee members have questions?
I took a little hike this afternoon around the lagoon, and standing on the Cabrillo Bridge looking out to the ocean, on either side, the present creek banks are sandbags stacked up about, well, I don't know how tall they are, but as part of this plan will be to remove those and then landscape the area.
Mr. Chair, committee member Case-Beer, I believe the sandbags that you're seeing falls right in the restoration area of the Cabrillo Bridge replacement project. So that, yeah, will be changed, where we're going to have a rock revetment and then plant the banks up from there. Is that anything? Yeah, and the sandbags would be, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I have a concern about the long-term maintenance. Is there going to be a component of breaching the sandbar at any point in the summer for water quality as part of this restoration? Because there'll be issues with Tidewater Goby in that case. So I'm hoping the answer is no, but I want to see what you say.
My name is Pat Kelly. I'm the assistant public works director, city engineer, and we are definitely not breaching the berm there. That was very carefully made a condition with the Coastal Commission for the Lower Mission Creek project. And so this is simply to really follow through with what we've described as the completion of the lagoon management plan.
Thank you. And that will be written in the document, I assure that berm will not be breached, correct? That'll be actually defined in the document.
Coastal Commission permit, yes.
Great, thank you.
I have a question about the Cabrillo Bridge. The slide showed maybe starting in spring of 2012, and then continuing on, you said, for a year?
2 years.
2 years. Wow, it's going to take a long time.
Yes.
Okay, that's clarified for me. Thank you.
Yeah.
I believe it's scheduled to start either fall 2011 or spring 2012. And I think that, I don't know if that's depending on funding, permitting, or.
I may address that, is that Chair Bullock, is that we are trying to finish the right-of-way acquisition, and that's a very involved process. And once we do complete the requirements from Caltrans, this is a Federal Highway Administration Caltrans funded project. There's a lot of steps to do, and so there is some slim chance that we could start this fall, but it's more probable that we'll start in spring. And the reason, if I may add, regarding your concern, well, comment about that's a long time to complete a project. Yes, indeed, and one of the complexities of the project is we can only build half the bridge at one time, and then plus we have to protect. We're limited as when we can work in the area. Anytime when you're working over water, you have to be very careful, and then there's a significant number of permit requirements that limit the work, as would be reasonable during limited times.
So then would there be in the plan to maintain traffic, maybe one lane in each direction? Is that the idea?
That is correct.
Any other comments from the committee?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Mrs. Grant for a very cogent overview of a complicated project, and I was impressed by the speed with which Mr. Kelly was able to cover that short distance when we heard the question about protecting the berm. I have a slightly different question. When you're talking about the adaptive flexibility of the restoration, and you're talking about a 5-year commitment to maintenance after it's completed, have you or your talented consultants built into there any scenarios for gradually increasing sea level or tidal surge so that the historical picture of Mission Creek from 10 years ago as it met the ocean may not necessarily be a valid projection for where it'll be 10 years from now?
Mr. Chair, committee member Moldaver, as far it does have to be adaptive, and we're working with the current survey as it currently stands. And even in a 2-year period, we have no idea what certain storm event we may encounter just in this time when it's ready to go to construction. So from that standpoint, we do recognize that we are going to have to be flexible and kind of compare. Once we are able to move into construction, are we dealing with the same footprint as originally started? And if it does change significantly, then we need to have it readdressed for the zones, et cetera.
All right, well, thank you very much for your presentation. All right, moving on to item 8B, the Sycamore Creek Widening Project. Mr. Benson?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, there are 2 public works projects, and we just heard about the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project. Public Works is also working on a creek widening project on Sycamore Creek to address flooding problems around Lower Sycamore Creek as well. And it's another significant project, and slightly different project team, but with one member that is the same, and that's Jessica Grant. She's going to give the presentation on this project as well.
Hello again, Jessica Grant, me. All right, so also a very exciting project is the Sycamore Creek Widening and Restoration Project. Before I launch into details of this one, I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of background on the Lower Sycamore Creek watershed. This Sycamore Creek does have a history of significant flooding, especially in the lower reaches of this creek, particularly in 1995, that magic year, where we experienced significant flooding, in particular in these neighborhoods just north of Highway 101. And as you may recall, it's the Deluxe and Green mobile home parks right in that area. And so basically what we're experiencing in lower Sycamore Creek is that there's restrictions due to inadequate bridge and channel reach capacities there. And the lower Mission Creek, the watershed starts from the mouth here and then goes all the way up to, this is Yananali Street here. So when I talk about certain channel capacity restrictions, that's the segment that I'm talking about. One of the whole goal to improve for this watershed is the flood control. And right now the goal is to hopefully get it up to about 300 cubic feet per second, or the maximum extent feasible given site constraints. One major constraint had been the Highway 101, also known as the Sycamore Creek Bridge. That was a major pinch point right there, only carrying about 800 cubic feet per second. And so now, if you know that that's been recently reconstructed. And under that bridge, there's 3 bays. And the middle bay is the largest bay. And then there's 2 bays to the side. Middle bay is open right now. And then the 2 side bays are closed. And they will not be open until the downstream improvements are done. And time frame for that is actually outside of our 6-year capital, but definitely on our radar for areas of improvement. But because of the Highway 101 project and the opening of that bay, the next logical point for us to fix was the areas where there had been extreme flooding right in this section here, so just north of Highway 101 to about Punta Gorda Street. And again, why pick that section? Due to limited funding, and of course that's just another pinch point there. So that's where we're focusing on our efforts at this time. Just to give you an idea of how expansive the floodplain is in this area. This is the floodway in this cross-hatching here, and then this is the 100-year flood zone, and then in this wider white portion is the 500-year. And current flood capacity within the project area is about 900 to 1,600 cubic feet per second, which corresponds to a 6 or 12-year flood event. And then our improvements are to be about 2,000 cubic feet per second, which corresponds to a 17-year event. So it doesn't mean that the flood occurs in every 17 years, that you have a certain percentage chance of occurring in that year. So while we're not significantly changing the larger 100-year floodplain map with the proposed project, we're definitely decreasing the flood probability in this area. So we've actually broken the project into 2 phases. And again, just starting north of Highway 101, and then this is the Green Mobile Home Park that was from Deluxe, and then going just north for phase 2 of the Punta Gorda Street Bridge. So phase 1, this is the landscape plan. We're proposing to widen the creek about 20 feet wide for the channel bottom. And then we'll have some rock revetment buried with soil on top. And then from there, we'll go 2-to-1 slopes. And so the top of banks will be about 60 feet wide, and that actually corresponds exactly with the city's right-of-way line. So this is what it actually looks like in section view. So again, we have about 20 feet here, and then the rock revetment, buried rock revetment, and then the channel banks right there. So, and again, phase 1 ends about 150 feet south of Punta Gorda Street. And we're kind of stopping at that standpoint because this is a good staging area. There's a driveway for the Green Mobile Home Park. That would be a good staging area for this project. So phase 2 is then picking up from that area and then doing a bridge replacement at Punta Gorda Street, and then moving a little bit further, about 75 feet north of the bridge. And we're proposing to do a prefabricated bridge at this location. And when we can, those are the most ideal bridges to do because they have a limited impact to the creek. Because they're less dewatering, less earthwork, less concrete in the channel, etc. And as far as for habitat, we're removing about 0.3 acres of existing creek habitat and replacing 0.57 acres. And on our team, again, just like the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project, have Tamara Klug, restoration specialist, and David Black, landscape architect, assisting us with this. And for this project, we have 2 planting zones. So the first planting zone is where the riprap layer is, and we'll have several inches of topsoil. And it will be riparian shrubs such as mulefat and blackberry. And then the second half, where the bank is the 2-to-1 slope, we're really trying to create a nice canopy over the creek. So it'd be a mix of willows and sycamores, coast live oaks, elderberries. We're currently working with the Creeks Division on the final plant list for this project, but that's the whole goal is to have the nice outer riparian canopy with medium smaller shrubs densely to form the diverse understory. And similar to the lagoon restoration project, we'll have a 5-year maintenance period as well for this project. And for funding for this, we've been very fortunate. In December, we received funding from HUD, the U.S. Housing and Urban Development. It's called the Disaster Recovery Initiative Grant. And that is in the amount of $500,000. I think I forgot to mention earlier, but some background on Sycamore Creek. As you know, we experienced the T-fire that happened in the upper portion of the watershed, which causes alarm for the lower part. What we're worried about for future is mudslides, heavy debris flows, hyper-concentrated floods, etc. So that was kind of a little bit of the background of why we were receiving money from the Disaster Recovery Initiative. And we were just alerted by HUD that there might be additional funding, which is great. So we've been in coordination with them to see if we can get funding for phase 2. And hopefully we should have an answer within the next month or so. As far as permitting goes for this project, we are trying to go through permitting for both phases, the environmental review for both phases, and then hopefully permitting and for both if we can get the funding. So if we just only get the funding for phase 1, then we'll start summer, fall of 2011. But if we're able to get funding for both phases, then we'll do both phases at the same time in the summer of 2012. That concludes my presentation. Do you have any questions?
I had a question, but I also wanted to thank you for another succinct overview. And those of us who were here back in 95, 96 remember that disaster pretty well. I was wondering, for the people who are watching at home, this marvelous report on the Lower Mission Creek restoration that Cardinal Entrix did in conjunction with David Back Associates. Is that available online, or do you have extra copies at your office in case? Because there's such a wealth of information here covering a lot of the options that you went over, and especially since it's the same team that's helping you with the Sycamore Creek project. I was wondering if interested members of the public would be able to access it.
Mr. Chair and Committee Member Moldaver, yes, it is online on the Creeks page, and it is one of the attachments. I believe it's attachment 8C. And to clarify, that's for, yes, the lagoon restoration plan and not for the Sycamore Creek widening project.
May I ask? Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I really do appreciate it. And being new on the committee, I may be asking very naive questions, but not doubting the need for flood control improvements at this area. My question has to do with the T-fire implications, and as time passes since the actual fire, doesn't the greater risk from the fire diminish over time?
Flood, you mean?
To contribute to the flood issues. I mean, you originally got the grant, the $500,000, because of the T-fire, and that's great. That'll help in an area that needed it anyway, right? Because there was flooding even before the T-fire. But as time moves past the T-fire, aren't the hills getting healthier and there's less risk of flooding, greater flooding because of fire? You know, you still may have flooding just due to volume of water. Mm-hmm. Does that, my question make sense?
Mr. Chair and Committee Member
French.
French. Sorry. Can't read the name tag from me. Yes, that statement is correct. Would lessen over time, but it still takes a while for the vegetation to really establish. It is amazing to see how resilient the hills are and how quickly vegetation can come back. Because what was it last summer? We were looking at black hills, and now they're starting to become green again. So it would lessen over time, but yeah, the extent of vegetation that we had prior to the fire was so vast. So it still takes a while for that to establish.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. Does this restoration plan, specifically Phase A, include removal of structures that have been built along the banks of the creek that are impeding flows? And is there going to be a process that you're going to have to go through to remove those structures?
Mr. Chair and Committee Member Lomas, yes, there's a structure. It's on the green mobile home park. I don't believe it's a residence. I believe it's an accessory structure, but they have already been notified for a while now of the encroachment violation that is incurred. So they are aware that they are required to remove it prior to us doing construction.
Great, thank you.
And we do have an They had an encroachment permit as well that has been terminated prior to the start of this project. So eventually they have a driveway that's in the city right-of-way that will most likely be removed as part of this project under Phase 2.
Wonderful, thank you.
I was just going to comment about my fellow commissioner's question about the diminishing danger from flooding as each season passes. Well, I think that Santa Barbara learned a lot in the 60s. For those of you that weren't here, in 1964, we had the Coyote Fire that burned from San Marcos Pass to Carpinteria. And then 5 years later, in 69, we had incredible rains, 100-year rains. And we had flooding galore. Montecito, Santa Barbara, everywhere flooded because we did not do preemptive measures like have been done after the Tea Fire and the Hesacita Fire. I think the preemptive measure of hydroseeding the watershed will pay huge dividends in stabilizing those hillsides. And so hopefully, as you say, as the years go by, we'll be safer and safer.
I have 2 questions. The current state of the creek, is it I'm not familiar with it, so is it a concrete channel now, or is it kind of a natural flowing creek? That was one. And the second one is, are there wildlife and fish populations that are living in there that we're hoping to increase and make life better for?
Or no. Yes, that's Mr. Chair. So yeah, it is a natural bottom right now. Just talking to Mr. Kelly just to make sure. I wasn't sure quite under the bridge what it was right now, but I believe that is just natural ground as well. Culvert. It's a culvert. Okay, culvert. That will be taken out and then replaced within the prefab bridge. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. Okay.
So many details. I apologize. Pat Kelly, Chairman Bullock, is that there is part of, not part of this phase 1 and 2, which goes up just to north of Punta Gorda, but between Punta Gorda and Indio Muerto, there is a concrete bank. So the initial approach here, as part of the environmental analysis here, there is the only concrete structure is really just the bridge and some illegal encroachments that had been mentioned earlier. And also by widening the channel from, it's what 10, 15 feet within a 30-foot right-of-way, additional 30 feet have been provided by the termination of the encroachment permit for Green Trailer Park. Now there will be essentially a 60-foot wide riparian pathway, which will include the widened creek bottom and also 2-to-1 slopes that will meet the restoration plan that is being designed.
All right, thank you very much. Go ahead, Natasha.
I can make a comment as to the fish. There is some debate between the regulatory agencies on whether that has been historically a steelhead creek. Right now, we don't know of any steelhead, and they have not been surveyed within Sycamore. But that doesn't mean they haven't been there in the past. So I think that's still up to debate. And as far as tidewater goby, I believe tidewater goby had been found in the area by the zoo in the past, but I don't know if they're there every year. They do tend to wash out during high flows, and they can reestablish, but that could be cyclic too.
Are there any more comments on these issues? All right, so thank you for your presentations. All right. Mr. Benson, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, thanks, Mr. Chair.
So then moving on to item number 9, adjournment. Do I have a motion?
So I moved.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you.